Welcome to today's SMPTE Standards Webcast. Topic for today is Motion Picture Metadata Beyond the Basics. Welcome, everybody. I am your host, Joel Welch, SMPTE's Director of Professional Development. Thank you for being here and taking time out of your schedules. I know it's not always easy to attend, but hopefully the time that you spend with us will be valuable and worthwhile. The SMPTE Standard Series is a separate series of webcasts that we provide on relevant SMPTE standards and the webcasts are designed to inform you about the development efforts of SMPTE, new standards, standards that people and members have identified as having questions or needing additional information. These webcasts are open to members and non-members alike. They are live, however, not everybody can attend when they want to, so we do capture the webcasts for on-demand playback, and we will offer them on a quarterly basis. This is the third of our standards webcasts and should prove to be very interesting and useful. Today's guest speaker is Karen Broome. Karen is with Sony Electronics in the U.S. Technology Standards Office. Karen, without further delay, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Joel. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you well.
Great. I should perhaps also mention that I serve as the chair of SMPTE's 30MR10 Metadata Definition Working Group, which maintains SMPTE's registries, which we'll talk about today. So those of you who know me will not be surprised to find out that my presentation today is on metadata. But instead of the usual presentation stressing how critical metadata is to system integration and content operations, I'd like to go beyond the basics to examine some of the complexities of context. At the end of the presentation, I'd like to hear your questions about contextual metadata. I'm not sure if the format will allow it, but if possible, I'd love to hear use cases for contextual metadata from you. So for today's discussion, we're going to focus on core descriptive data and descriptive data workflows. The reason is that this metadata is most subjective and most subject to context. We won't be discussing playout or technical metadata deeply. We won't be specifically discussing any frame or clip-wrapped metadata. Most of what we'll be discussing will be issues arising from context, region, and language variation in subjective metadata. We'll discuss different approaches that you can use on an abstract level to structure your data. We'll discuss your standardization alternatives, what's out there today for you to use. And then we'll discuss ways that you can contribute to SMPTE standards and the SMPTE standards process. So just to review what core metadata is, although that is definitely dependent on who is defining the term, core metadata is central descriptive data applying to a work. It's usually aimed at locating and describing objects in a collection or across many collections. Core metadata is much more subjective than quantitative, and for this reason it can present some problems. It's much more likely to have variations based on context and language. But it's very, very important metadata. It's not something that should be left as an afterthought. It may be used to sell your product or to find assets in your archive so that you can sell or recombine assets. It may be used internally in queries against an operational data store to judge sales of products. And often your metadata is associated with identification schemes that can be very important to the operations of your business. So just to set a foundation for this discussion, we'll assume individual data terms or data values are the foundation of any data model. Data elements are defined to restrict the type of data value that can be stored in a structure. While some metadata can be free-form text or even thumbnail images, basic semantic metadata assumes that data terms are used to describe an object, process, or event. Data elements may have a description or definition, and may include any of the optional constraining parameters seen here. It may have a range of acceptable values, an associated unit of measure, a symbol used in computer programming languages, a display name used to display the data in a user interface. It also may include suggested or required enumerations or controlled vocabularies. Sometimes this data is known as metadata. Data values and data element definitions are ultimately combined into data structures. Examples of common data structures include MXF KLV, XML, HTML meta tags, SQL structured databases, RDF triple stores, abstract ontologies which express semantic relationships between terms, and taxonomies. The goal of any data modeling project is ultimately to provide meaning to some target audience, so your structure should support that meaning. But because data is made up of different types of human language readable terms, it is subject to linguistic interpretation and contextual differences, which we'll talk about today. So on the fragility of terms, I'm sure you've all heard quotes like these before. And the problem of shifting semantics is certainly not new. Kevin Smith said, "One man's frankness is another man's vulgarity." Henry Brooks Adams writes, "No one means all he says, and yet very few say all they mean, for words are slippery and thought is viscous." And I really wanted to include this last quote. What words say does not last. The words last, because the words are always the same, and what they say is never the same. I note that by the time I found this on a website prior to this presentation, it had already been translated into the Spanish by W.S. Merwin, so I guess the author was wrong about the words always staying the same. I couldn't tell you for sure whether this quote accurately reflects what the author intended or not, but it makes the point that you may never predict the true contextual reach of your data output. What we're going to talk about today is how to take contextual differences into consideration when developing your data input and output formats. If you don't do this, you may shortchange context that you did not consider in advance. I've often heard this described as the center of the world problem, in which every business customer or application user thinks that they are the center of the world in terms of how the definitions and information architecture should be. But it's important to look at your stored data from a variety of contexts, not just your own corner of the world. Metadata may, of course, appear in another language, but even within a single language, the data can often be written in different scripts depending on its region. Or it may have conceptual and contextual variants that extend beyond just language. It's important to consider that in some countries, more than one language is spoken in different regions. There may be issues with the gender of the user or the word in some languages. The language may have its own complex sorting rules. You should really question all assumptions that another region operates in the way that you expect. Find experts. I think the internet today makes it fairly easy to reach people in other parts of the world and request input. The industry you're in will certainly influence how you store and output your data. We all know the importance of the metadata to the entertainment industry, but what happens when the defense industry wants to share equipment, software, or cameras? What about the requirements of large national archives? What about the operation-intensive requirements of retailers? And don't forget, the medical industry is a heavy user of motion imagery technology as well. Internet requirements have forced a need for descriptors to identify individual dialects and Unicode locale settings that combine currency, time zone, language, and region standards. These standards may be important to consider when developing your metadata. But what about the requirements of social media where folksonomies rule? Certainly your industry perspective will affect the decisions you make when structuring your data. And lastly, your audience. You need to know more about your audience than language. What is their sophistication level? When were they born? What do they want? What do they find funny or appealing? So why isn't there one true metadata standard today? Here's some examples of core metadata properties. We see title, we see episode, a season, or maybe a bundle if you're looking at this from a retail context. You may have cast or participants in a work, dates associated with that work of various kinds. You may have a synopsis or description, a region, and a language, and much of this data is fairly universal. But when core metadata schemas add some of the items from this other list, problems can result. Identifiers may be very specific for use in a particular region for a particular purpose. Genre or keyword hierarchies, sometimes these come from national archives and are very regional. Something such as VAT tax would be a critical data element for a retail application in Europe and has that context. Again, it's not one country, it may be multiple countries that you'll need to consider, but not all countries. Retail price is certainly regional, down to the currency as well as the pricing. You may need to integrate with external standards such as DVBSI. You may need to select categories from the MARC classifications that are commonly used. There's other Library of Congress classifications that may be relevant, but may be regional or contextual. Also, ratings, whether they're content maturity ratings or other type of ratings, those are frequently regional and often operate in different ways in different regions. Sometimes there is one body for film and one body for television. Other times one body serves both contexts, and you need to know the difference. And human names can also be subject to context and region. So like it or not, metadata often brings together different voices for the common good, and culture and context clashes inevitably result. But who should make the choices? In our center of the world problem, whose voice reigns supreme? If you're in charge of metadata at your company, you will likely hear questions like these. How? We need to output hundreds of variations of the same title. The metadata is always different. Which standard? There are too many to choose from. Why? I have custom applications and custom metadata and specific needs. And one that I've personally heard more than once, who are you to tell me what my metadata should be? Some companies will enact strict data governance plans, and standards bodies form specialty committees. It's important to consider experts external to your company who may be looking at these same problems internationally. Sometimes these experts may be outside your industry or may span multiple industries. SMPTE is one place where groups representing different application contexts can meet and learn from each other. Edge case discussions can help improve data model flexibility, ideally before international interoperability problems result. It's also important to note that terminology changes with time. So time is a type of context. Here's an example that I think makes this point well. In the 1940s, when this poster was created, on the right, when people thought of meta, they thought of this charcoal briquette that was used with the cooking stoves of that era. It's seen in this poster from Nicholas Stokeland. So even with a common prefix like meta, we see that its common human meaning in the English language has changed with time and context. We need to be aware that time influences terminology. Data must always be maintained and kept up to date. Your system must enable the type of quick editorial and user interface triage that will enable you to keep your data up to date. It's important to remember that not only do you need to keep data fresh, you need to keep your data structures fresh and constantly review them for accuracy. Data for digital sales should receive careful editorial and marketing review, and the systems that you create should enable this. I guess the fundamental rule is don't create what you can't maintain. Synopses can become particularly dated with time and must be written to sell to today's customer. This is important. All terminology is subject to this type of change. Don't ever expect technology to make this problem go away. You need to use technology in business decisions to minimize the impact of the changing world around you. In metadata, arbitrary terminology choices can be both political and contextual, And here are some examples. If you're looking at the broadcast context versus the film context, there may be difference in terminology used for iris versus the term aperture, and yet it's very meaningful to these communities to use the correct term, the term that's most familiar to them. You may have differences between Europe and the US, differences in the way the term program, a common term, is spelled, genre classifications. I don't believe that there is a global definition of the term football. That's always going to be subject to regional interpretation. There are also cultural norms that you need to be very aware of, even in your data. Ratings bodies may enforce severe penalties if you make mistakes in your data, or you could cause damage to your brand if it's insensitive. It's important to look for these things and avoid cultural biases at the system level. The way you can make this better is to enable understanding through an effective UI that allows for the regional differences. And also in your schemas, it's always important to use human readable naming schemes. You don't gain much from short, indecipherable data names, and they could be misinterpreted by developers of user applications, which potentially could corrupt your data. If we wanted to take a look at an example of another example of metadata across a variety of contexts, if we looked at basic title data, if we were working within the film or long form context, we might ask, is this a working title? Is it a string of concatenated metadata that includes the shot, the date, the audio configuration? This might be used for production. In the broadcast context, it may be more important to archive short sequences from live broadcasts. You may have replays and parts of programs that are most important to store in your archive. If you're looking at this from an archival context, you're mostly going to be concerned with what is a work and what are its manifestations and some of the models that are used in the archival world. What is a version? That's always a difficult and important question to ask. Are unique artistic cuts a version? What constitutes a unique artistic cut? If it's a planned serial, does a work have subparts, and can your system handle that complexity? In the retail context, you may look at titles in terms of bundling and cross-selling. You may create new packages. In this sense, the original packaging intent may be less important as far as selling a collection of works. Localized title branding and contextual branding may apply in the retail context, and certainly how content is identified may be important. So what about working with other regions? It's important to remember that language-sensitive data is not as simple as translating. You may have to deal with idioms, local promotions. If you're looking at ways to manage this complexity, I think a good place to start is to look at internet technology. Internet technology is designed to be used by the entire world as a fundamental starting point, and so it will accommodate many of these contextual use cases. Always consider your technology's broadest application, even if you have to specialize that application later. You can always customize, localize, and contextualize right where you need it most. It's important to make your data accessible to others. This means publishing your data and your data definitions on websites so that those who receive your data know what it means. And where possible, it helps to conform to regional and international standards that are understood and can provide a level of interoperability. So if you're working with a complex system for contextual metadata, one of the first things you'll need to do is determine the linguistic contexts that are relevant to your application. The question you need to ask is, the audience I'm trying to reach speaks. If we wanted to think of this question in terms of what I might typically see in an application or website rollout, if we were starting with a native English speaking example, initially we might see a rollout of an application to a monolingual multi-region application. This would add regional variations on the same language. The application would be available in different countries, There may be issues with the use of currency and time zones, but still you're working with the same language. The next level up, you might throw in a second language. Once you've done that, it's not as hard to throw in a third or a fourth. You might see French, German, and Italian, and a Spanish added. This will certainly add some complexity to your system in terms of punctuation, data parsing, and data subsetting. The next level up might be Chinese, Japanese, Russian. In this case, you'll deal with new complexities, including character set variations, Ruby, which is a type of phonetic markup for Asian languages. You may deal with new complexities in search, and you need to be aware that those complexities may have multiple levels within your system or application, and it must work in all levels. You also will deal with non-Western sorting rules. Everything isn't always ABC. Then from there, if you wanted to really push the envelope, you might add in Hebrew and Arabic, or mixed text. Often when you're dealing with right to left text on the web, you're mostly dealing with bidirectional text, because there will inevitably be some left to right text mixed in with the right to left text. So you need to know ways of switching. This also will present new search complexities, and as I found out when creating this presentation, even cutting and pasting in a right to left language can be difficult. If you've done all that, then you may be really able to get into context, dealing with regional languages and linguistic context, dialects of languages, and localization, really adding the ability to market to unique channels in a locale and context within that locale. It's important to remember that the internet assumes all languages in all contexts as a default. So again, relying on internet technology may help you when you're dealing with these scenarios. Many times there will be a simple one-to-one correspondence for terms between languages. For example, imagine we were creating a metadata element to describe different types of fruit, and maybe we used a database to help store localized string values for each language. In the orange bar, I've indicated audiences for each data value using RFC 5646 language codes for English, French, Japanese, and Hebrew. But have I dealt with all the complexities of each language? Has my layout allowed for the right to left text flow for Hebrew? Can I search for items in a database using Japanese character sets? Will all of my scripts work against these unique character sets? You may be unhappy to find minor incompatibilities will result in a great deal of effort to make these schemes work effectively. But ultimately, each type of fruit is assigned a numeric value in a database. Is there any reason why on today's common touchscreen displays you couldn't avoid such complexities by using a linked graphic to populate the correct database value? It will always be a judgment call. Be creative and put your effort where it provides the most value. And don't be afraid to think outside the box. But what if there isn't a perfect one-to-one correspondence between a term and its localized value, or contextualized value? There are other strategies that can be used to create flexibility in controlled vocabularies. Sometimes subsets of data items can be used to create one category list that serves multiple regions or multiple contexts, but this can present problems, especially when the data is queried for internal use such as sales tracking. Above, we see a classification called genre, and we see common subcategories of adventure, drama, and anime. In English, there may only be a single category for anime, whereas in Japan there may be many categories, some of which have content maturity restrictions. It's important to consider when to use subsetting and when to allow unique regional lists. There is no single right answer to this question. The structure above has an implied two-level hierarchy that may present complexities in some cases. And ultimately, the text above still isn't optimized for the native language speaker of Japanese. Even within the items marked for the Japanese market, we have additional categories that may be subsections of that market, such as genres that are only intended for adults. In some ways, this hierarchy serves everyone and no one, doesn't it? It's also important to be aware of cultural issues and how they can affect queries. If we wanted to look at example 2, imagine a verdict type data element. I'm sorry this example isn't from the motion picture world, but it was an easy way of showing the point. As in the last example, a numeric value can be used to represent a certain semantic and create labels that can be used across all regions. But this can result in unintended contextual bias. In one country, for example, a defendant can be declared guilty or innocent. In some countries, however, a verdict of not proven can be assigned. So a defendant in some cases could be declared guilty, not guilty, or innocent. While the numeric value of 2 would seem to indicate the two not guilty categories are semantically equal, we know that is not the case because the innocent data pool in one region has a different semantic. In this case, the difference in the definition of the term innocent affects the way the meaning of the term not guilty as well. Another example where you may not have a one-to-one correspondence in your data may be when you are localizing to a language that contains gendered forms. This can affect user metadata, especially that metadata used to populate form emails and letters, as well as store page views. These are just some caveats. If you can't handle this sort of system complexity internally, there may be many service providers today who can help you manage localized assets and data. Consider the impact of your architecture choices on ingestion. Display or UI text can often be fixed much easier than bad data. You can always unify unique vocabularies at a higher level, as we see here. For example, see these two genre lists in the local language. In the previous example, I used Romanji for understanding of the Japanese language categories, but this would not be helpful to a native language classifier developing content classifications for a native language interface. You can see how it's possible to create unique vocabularies to serve certain contexts. On the left, we have a retail genre list in Japanese used by the retailer Tsutaya to classify anime. If we wanted, we could even identify this linguistic context using RFC 5646 style tagging as identified for the Japanese anime audience, seen here JPX anime or JPX Suda. There are certain sites that only specialize in anime content. In Japan, these categories may be useful. On the right, we could create a completely unique vocabulary for use in North America, where anime is only one choice on the list. Anime has fans in the US, but there may not be a need for the deep hierarchies found in the US, or found in Japan, sorry. Television is always a controversial genre category. It is frequently used in retail or website drop-down lists, but rarely used in a motion picture archive, combining television and film assets. So we could create a retail context as well that adds that value to the list. All of this is legal using the IETF language tags today. Using different language tags to identify these audiences or contexts, you can classify content intended for those audiences. It adds complexity, but is often desirable to allow multiple user interfaces to interact with the same data set, covering the various linguistic variations found in your data. Your budget may determine what you can build. Mapping localized instances of data or localized classifications to abstract contextual models can help unify such contextual classification lists. If, as in the previous example, you created a set of genre classification lists for a particular language, you could create a unique list for each audience that you had identified. You don't have to use the RFC 5646 tagging I've used here. There are many ways to do this. But it's important to consider that within a single language, you may have more than one audience or stream for your data. Here we've created a genre structure that classifies genre by language. We have the English language, and then we have two dialects of English, as well as the contextual streams for the airline, television, retail. We may have an original version that we put in our archive that has its own genre classification, and we may even have a production instance of this data. Here we've created a genre structure that classifies genre by language and dialect. In other locales, however, the list of audiences may be very different as you allow for unique language regions within a single country, markets that are unique to that country, variances in script types used in subtitling, and other parameters of the local format. This is a highly simplified diagram describing a data workflow. This may be in sync with your content production workflow or not. It may be helpful to envision an optimized data workflow. If we consider the green arrows as the workflow intended, where an English language original version might be used to create an English language DVD, there may be versioning that comes off of that for airlines and television. We may ultimately create a version for Germany and Japan. These versions may ultimately be stored in various archives, each with a unique metadata format. And we may also have retail considerations for digital formats. But what happens when there's a text or data change that is independent of the essence? Does the data workflow always need to follow the same content workflow? Or could your data's maintenance team choose update paths optimized for data localization instead, where you see the English language instantly going out into the different locales? If you build it, always make sure you can maintain it. Such localized workflows can be outsourced if you require. You often hear people say, oh, it's just semantics. If you're on this call, I'm hoping you're not one of those people. Some data is definitely significantly more subjective, and I think this is especially true of core metadata, which is why I'm speaking to you today. There's a difference between a contextual user interface label used to enable better multicultural understanding and a defined semantic schema item. Sometimes contextual terminology may be built into your schema. But be sure that the semantics expressed in a content creation UI don't confuse your user. The input semantic must match the output semantic, and back-end and front-end semantic mismatches can result in bad data. So what are your options today for contextual descriptive metadata? What standards are there out there? Well, before you invent your own standard, study these and consider adopting one. But always be prepared to export your data into any format. All of these standards offer some flexibility in the definition of controlled vocabularies. They allow you to point to particular controlled vocabularies that suit your context. Consider the context of these standards when deciding which one might be right for you. Realistically, studios today need agile data that can be easily manipulated into these or other output formats. To review the standards listed on this slide, Dublin Core offers a general format with great interoperability internationally, but because it's not unique to any specific type of archive object, it may not be specific enough for some media uses. Standards such as XMP and EBU Core extend the Dublin Core metadata set and inherit its interoperability while adding to or clarifying its semantics. PB Core is another descriptive metadata scheme originally developed for North American public television. Realistically, you may need to consider all of these standards as contextual output formats. The Movie Labs schemas used by the DECE ultraviolet work, as well as IDER and complementary work from the Entertainment Merchants Association, EMA, includes requirements for pricing and retail bundling that may not be as applicable to non-retail or archival uses. It's important to consider the context that is most important to you when structuring your internal repository. When we consider the linguistic context for data mentioned in previous slides, it's important to note that most of these standards allow flexibility in the way that language codes can be defined, and this can be a critical point of interoperability. These language values may determine how many linguistic contexts you can reliably serve. But it also may be important, if you're a content creator, to consider interoperability with other content formats, such as advertising and broadcast formats, and your global marketplace when developing your internal storage scheme. To provide some details on some of these standards, EBU Core first. The European Broadcast Union has worked to develop EBU Core, a core metadata standard designed to meet multilingual requirements in Europe. EBU Core extends Dublin Core for media and provides unique and deep vocabularies for content and audience classification. This is a good place to start if you're developing your own internal database. EU Screen has chosen this as its metadata standard, and UK's Digital Production Partnership, the UK DPP, references EBU Core as well. If you've heard of FIMS, this is a specification from the EBU and AMWA, the Advanced Media Workflow Association. EBU Core is the foundation of that technical metadata. EBU Core exists in XML formats, JSON, RDF, with a full mapping to googleschema.org, and soon will be registered as KLV. So in this sense, we can see that multiple formats can be used to express the same class model. PB Core was developed by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in the US. It also extends Dublin Core interoperability. It's used to organize archives found at public television stations across the US, which may be deep in historical archives. It has similarities to many other core descriptive models. Like the other models, it allows flexible assignment of controlled vocabularies. And as we mentioned, it's important to keep your data fresh. The latest release of this was in January 2011, and it is being updated regularly, as are really all of these standards. A new standard, especially used in the Hollywood area, the Entertainment Industry Data Repository. The IDER registry is built on DOI, Digital Object Identifier technology. We can see an example of what the IDER looks like at the bottom of this slide, where it has a prefix for the IDER registry, a unique suffix for each asset, and then a check digit for digital use. Participants in this work include major Hollywood studios, Cable Labs, Comcast, Rovi, New Star. There's some National Archives participating in this work as well. It's aimed at specifically at digital asset identification needs. It deals with things such as bundling that may be important for retail. It provides fine-grained asset and version identification. It provides a link between the IDER, the assets and instances of multilingual data, and provides a link between the IDER DOI identifier and other identifier systems. So if we look at all these standards and we realize that they do have similarities, are there opportunities for harmonization? I chaired a SMPTE study group on Common Core metadata where we looked at the differences between some of these standards. In the end, we held an in-person meeting at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences where many of the stakeholders from PB Core, EBU Core, and other standards, the IDER work, attended. And while goals and timelines differed from the projects and ultimately there weren't any immediate next steps identified, we did discover that the greatest distinctions between these standards were in the controlled vocabularies. So if controlled vocabularies are flexible, as I've indicated that they can be in this presentation, couldn't one model serve all formats? I think it's important to know that this won't happen magically. It really won't happen until all stakeholders are willing to come together, perhaps make some sacrifices, and work together towards a common timeline. Until then, some of these contextual optimizations serve useful purposes and will continue to prevail. So you might wonder, is there any core metadata that can be used in any context? Well, I might not have great news for you. If we look at languages, we have the ISO 6391 2-character language code standards. We have the ISO 6392 bibliographic and terminological 3-character code standards. Those are two unique standards with subtle differences. We have ISO 6393, which allows for the concept of macro languages, which encompass other dialect-type linguistic entities. However, if your system or database is not recognizing those macro languages, you may not be using this standard as intended. ISO 6395 defines language groupings. ISO 6396 defines very specific language dialects as well as spoken and written variants and script variants. Of course, we've already discussed the IETF XML lang considerations, but sometimes those are very difficult to use in a database because it is not easy to enumerate those values. Maybe we can have some luck with country or region data. Nope. Unfortunately, there are many standards to express this as well. There are the ISO standards, 3166-1 and ISO 3166-2. One identifies countries, the other identifies subregions of those countries. But even within those standards, there is a 2-character variant and a 3-character variant for countries. Also equally used are the United Nations M49 codes. All three of these code sets can potentially be used in language tags. There's also the international press uses IPTC codes for country and city dateline type information when filing news stories and photos. And of course, your local postal service would also like to think that they know something about region. There are FIPS and other postal code schemes used around the world that may help you classify regions. You may already know that first name and last name has some bias towards Western languages. In Asian languages, family name and given name is often a good way to phrase this. However, if your user interface doesn't feature those terms correctly, your data may still get corrupted. It's always important when dealing with this type of metadata to consult experts. They may be outside of the motion picture industry. Contribute to the discussion. If you have use cases that are unique to you, most of these groups would welcome your input and use cases. And please don't make up codes. There are user-defined areas that can be used for this. You can make up codes, but you must do it in the prescribed way by the standard, or interoperability problems will result. Another way you can build in flexibility is to use URNs in XML to reference enumerations. This allows you to reference external thesauri and vocabularies. It's often better to point to the source vocabulary than create your own version. It's best to let the vocabulary creator explain it, so just reference the URN in your schema. I've seen problems created by subtle rewording of these third-party vocabulary standards. So how can you increase your data flexibility? Again, take advantage of user-defined schema areas. There's ways to carry proprietary XML or class 13, which is proprietary metadata in MXF. XML natively allows internet-friendly localization, allowing for contextual vocabularies. Consider the vocabulary as a pivot point for your different contexts in linguistics. Reference external vocabularies and structures, and always start with clean RFC 5646 language codes. Here's some examples of many different types of structures and query languages that may help you with your metadata. These standards don't tell you how to structure your metadata or what it should be, but it provides methods for carriage and transport and interchange. Sparkle, triple stores, RDF, and ontology web language, SCOS, these are all semantic web technologies that allow you to indicate broader and narrower semantics. We also have standard registries. The IANA language subtag registry holds the components of the XML lang standard. IANA also has a time zone registry. There's the Common Locale Data Registry from the Unicode Consortium, which contains language, sorting rules, time zones, and language-specific Unicode character sets. You can always do your own research. There may be other ISO and IETF character sets that or vocabularies that may be useful to you. So before starting from scratch, ask yourself, what problem am I trying to solve? Is there anyone else working on it? Does this issue need a new outlook? Can my data be carried in existing structures? Look for standards organizations that best suit your needs across all contexts, and always seek international representation at meetings. You can always consider industry-specific constraints on standards. This is common in MXF. You need to know when interoperability is more important than customization. Your internal storage will likely be unique to you. So always determine your needs and accept your cultural ignorance. Check your assumptions with those in regions and contexts. There are examples of this from other industries where different groups have come together. The EPUB format is a digital format used in the book industry that can serve all these different types of documents. It required international participation to do this, and we needed to engage Internet SDOs as well as the W3C and Linguist to create the interoperability in this work. And the core metadata was limited, but the interoperability is there. And the flexibility is there to add controlled vocabularies. So how can SMPTE help? SMPTE writes standards that bring together many individual standards into architectures that can be reliably mapped. Formats such as MXF and BXF may incorporate external standard vocabularies. MXF can be constrained or extended to suit your needs. It's important to know that SMPTE is moving towards web services models and XML structures, and SMPTE serves a broad range of users to get input. If we wanted to look at general context SMPTE standards, the MXF work serves as a foundation for other SMPTE KLV work. This takes a broad approach to data definition and covers many contexts. It includes mappings from external standards to SMPTE standards. There's many XML projects in 31FS, and all of the MXF data is, of course, based on key length value and universal labels. The 30MR Metadata and Registries Technology Committee maintains the metadata registries for SMPTE and allocates ULs. Those are the universal identifiers used by MXF. We have the Metadata Elements Dictionary, which defines KLV data elements, both custom and standard. We have the Types Dictionary, which defines common data types. We have a Labels Dictionary, which defines parameters of frame rates, types of wrapping, and other parameters. And we have the Groups Register, which allows you to group elements together. SMPTE also deals with timeline and temporal metadata. Though this isn't usually thought of as core metadata, SMPTE offers MXF options for header and index data, frame wrapping, clip wrapping, frame region specification, and multi-channel audio definition. SMPTE time text is an example of a temporal data standard. This allows subtitle specification that ties script data or subtitles to an essence timeline. And of course, within SMPTE we also have contextual standards. The 21DC Digital Cinema Technology Committee will look at digital cinema standards, XML that integrates with MXF for that world. 24TB deals with time text, as we discussed. 32NF, Networks and Facilities, will deal with the complexities of live television and broadcasters, so it will have that perspective. 34CS is a new committee dealing with metadata for automated processing and playout in XML. This is where much of the SOA and WSDL type work is going on. And the Broadcast Exchange format, which is an XML format, is also developed in this committee. It's important to know that live scenarios have unique workflows. Also, we have a new standard that's specifically designed for multi-context output. The 35PM Packaging and Media Technology Committee works on the interoperable master format aimed at resolving many of the complexities of versioning and associated metadata. CPL, or composition playlists, and output profile lists offer flexibility for different contexts. Multilingual metadata will be a key feature of this. Today, it's mostly focused on technical and playout list type metadata. But ultimately, this will allow for the dynamic creation of renditions for different contexts, cuts, and languages. And this allows specifically for context-specific application requirements. We encourage you to interact directly with the 30MR Technology Committee. You can register new items in Class 13, create your own space. You can contribute to strategic sessions and user sessions about requirements. You can ask for clarifications on some of the work that we do. If you have your own format, you could potentially propose new work, or you could provide input on harmonization projects. We always, of course, welcome your feedback. So if you'd like to get involved, it's important to know that there's 2 levels of SMPTE membership. You can be a member or you can be a standards level member. When you're a standards level member, you get to actually vote on the ballots. You can also participate in user sessions if you don't wish to be formally involved. You can observe mailing lists without being directly involved or attending meetings. But if you wish to join technology committees, again, you can become an observer to observe the mailing lists. In doing that, you are welcome to comment on all ballots, but you won't have a vote on those ballots. But your comments will be reviewed by the technology committee. And you can also join as a participant, except you should be aware that this comes with specific voting and attendance requirements. And if you're not that technical, just remember you can always contribute use cases either directly to committee participants or on the user days. We welcome your feedback on standards. It helps us write better documents for you. And again, participate in user days. Thank you. I guess I'll now open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Karen. And if you would like to ask a question of Karen, please use the text chat box at the bottom of the screen. We will take them in the order in which they're received. And Karen, we did receive one question offline. And the question is, if either is good for retail, is there another best for production? And the author, or the questioner, clarified a bit, meaning saying retail-oriented means various versions of a work, for instance, language-specific, and production is workflow, where a work is being built from components. So is there another best for production?
Well, there are UMIDs are frequently as an identifier that's frequently used in production. I'm not sure if you're talking about specifically the metadata or the identifier itself. There is a difference. If you're talking about production, you may need very granular frame level identification, and production you will need to, your requirements for identification and object identification are going to be very different. I'd say that UMIDs are commonly used today. Metadata itself is identified using universal labels. I think in terms of production workflows, there is perhaps no, again, like everything, there's no clear winner. There's likely a lot of options that you can use, and MXF allows some flexibility in being able to embed different types of identifiers and either attach those to clips, frames, really any segment of media.
I believe it did. I do not see any further questions from our audience. Is there anything you would like to tell us about the standards, the committee that you are chairing? Anything at all? What type of representation is there?
Yeah, I chair the 30MR10 Metadata Definition Working Group. This is the group that's actually tasked with maintaining the day-to-day allocation of universal labels. We're the ones that make sure that the definition is clear when viewed in context with all other SMPTE metadata items. We assign the identifiers that are then used in MXF. Because this process actually, it's complicated. It's a publishing process, and we do have changes that are made at times and clarifications that are made. So we broke out a whole committee just basically to deal with these issues. My working group manages the actual registries. At the higher level, we deal with more of the schema specifics. So at the 30MR Technology Committee level, we deal with how that data is structured and what my committee actually needs to store. And so then my committee just does the day-to-day maintenance of the actual SMPTE KLV registers that manage MXF. And I guess the thing to announce with some of our registries, for those of you who may be familiar with them today, we're right now in the process of converting these to a more XML-friendly format. Ultimately, we're still tied to the MXF data model, but we are assigning symbols that will be nice and friendly and human readable to use in XML. We're also allowing a universal label format that can be expressed as a URN, which again is useful in web services and XML type applications. So we're doing our best to respond to the changing needs of the industry, but we can't do it without help and input from others. So anyone on this call is always welcome to contact me. You can probably find me through the SMPTE directory and website, or you can join the committee as an observer.
Thank you.
We'd be
And
happy
our
to
friend
hear from you.
Phil Lelleveld from USC ETC has asked, our hyper-personalized entertainment offer project will map frame, clip, scene level metadata against data being gathered on individuals' preferences by the online advertising ecosystem. Is this granularity of metadata being addressed by SMPTE or any other body?
Well, that's a very interesting question and an interesting use of the frame, clip, and scene level metadata. Just maybe a side thought. For the frame level, clip level, we do have projects from AdID that are coming to SMPTE. I know that hasn't hit us yet, so I'm somewhat hesitant what I should say about that. I know that AMWA is doing some work in this area. If you look at SMPTE time text along with the frame, clip, and scene level metadata, I've often thought that that may present some opportunities for advertisers where you're actually listening to what the characters are saying or what's being said on the screen. That could also, in addition to your frame, clip, and scene level metadata, that could also be used to drive that type of advertising view. Today, I'm not sure if we have the right representation in SMPTE to express some of the consumer scenarios. However, I know Harold Geller of AdID and the 4A advertising organization has recently become more interested in SMPTE. I believe he may be doing a presentation at our next meeting. So I think we may see some advertising projects come to SMPTE, but exactly the granularity level remains to be determined, because again, I think some of that may be very region and context specific. It may be our job to create the structures that enable someone like the ETC to make use of that data in a more dynamic and regional, contextual, and hypermedia environment.
Very good. And David
Thanks.
O. Fuentes from Secaucus asks, is there a metadata dictionary for all metadata, or will there ever be?
That's a great idealist question. I would say no. However, if you look at RP210, this is a very complete list of metadata that might be used in the motion picture context. Again, if we're thinking about motion pictures, that list of metadata may be very different if you were using motion imagery in the medical world, for example. So I think the idea that a single metadata dictionary would apply to the entire world and all its contexts is maybe the point I'm trying to make here, that you can't do that without shortchanging certain contexts. So what you need to do is know when to build in that contextual flexibility and when to force consensus. And those are very difficult questions that metadata people usually need to deal with in their job. There's always judgment calls. There's times when interoperability is most important, and then there's cases like advertising where you may want to really reach a particular customer in a particular market and use the metadata in a very regional or contextual way. So if you want what I believe to be one of the most complete metadata dictionaries today, allowing for the fact that it contains some data type redundancies, take a look at the RP210 spreadsheet, take a look at the semantic work from the EBU. PMeta, their standard, has a great list of elements. But again, we're only dealing with part of the world, and we may only be dealing with the English language. There are other languages in the world, and those languages have semantic differences that will ultimately affect any metadata dictionary. So It's a big world, and there's not one way to describe it. But that
And our
makes it
final
interesting, I
question,
guess.
I think that's Hans, comes from Hoffman. How far can a standards body go in terms of standardizing metadata, even to schema level? How would this relate to business applications?
I think as we discussed in this presentation, it is possible to standardize a single data model and allow great flexibility within controlled vocabularies. We do this today, though we don't have necessarily we do have the SMPTE DMS1 standard, which is used for descriptive metadata that can allow you to reference external thesauri and vocabularies, and you would use the same strategy with XML, where you might be able to create a single model but allow the type of contextual differences on the controlled vocabulary level that will enable you to create an application for retail, an application for archival, an application just oriented at advertising, or even applications that are oriented around the very demanding live requirements of a broadcast workflow where content is combined from different sources all over the world. It takes great, rich metadata to be able to do that. So I do think that it's possible to serve different contexts with the same metadata standards, and we do it today. But I think the question is, can we do it better? And have we really identified all the contexts where our metadata is being used? Are we serving our customers
Thank
ultimately?
you, Karen. And it was a very
Thank you.
informative session, as I thought, and you did a very good job. Thank you. I appreciate the time and effort you put into creating the presentation and the time with our audience. And I'd also like to thank our participants in the webcast. I know it's not always easy to participate, but taking time out for these kinds of things hopefully provides you with some educational value. Would like to also ask you to join us next time when our SMPTE Standards webcast will cover IMF. And with that, I would like to bid you farewell and safe travels if you are going to IBC shortly. Thank you very much again to Karen, and have a good day, everybody.